Okay, let's move on to the American people and what they want to see out of this Congress and how they are feeling about things in general. Let's put this up on the screen. This is the latest from CBS News. And they have a comparison in this poll of how people are feeling now versus how they felt back a year ago. And people are feeling a little bit better. It's not great. So back in January of 2022, only 26% of Americans said things were going well. Now that 26% has moved up to 34%. So we're up over a third of Americans who say things are going pretty well. In terms of going badly, back a year ago, you had 73% saying things were going badly. Now you have that number ticking down to 65%. So you're basically at a third of people saying now things are going well and 2/3 saying they are going badly. You also had some interesting data here about, specifics on how people are feeling. It's kind of the same on the economy. Things are still not good. People are still saying they're not good, but they are a little bit higher than before the fall midterm campaign. The job market stands out as a bright spot in terms of how people feel, even as concerns about inflation continue. And fewer voters think the economy's direction is getting worse than thought so in October. I think part of this, Saagar, is, during a political campaign and you're getting a lot of ads and a lot of commentary about how poor the economy is leading into the midterms. I think that does affect the numbers somewhat, although I think the biggest thing that affects these numbers is the way people feel in their normal everyday lives.
Yeah, I mean, look, the midterms really just gave us a lot to chew on because the truth is that a lot of people cared about inflation, but enough people were willing to say that they care about much more intangible things than inflation. So even though the going well number has slightly increased from now to the 1st of 2022, the still vast majority think it's going bad. But as we saw under Trump, that didn't actually mean anything in terms of the vote split. The condition of the economy, people are willing to vote it bad, and yet they're still really just don't care, or they split on partisan in terms of the view that it looks like. So,
or they didn't feel like the Republicans had an answer
right,
that was going to make sense in terms of making the economy better.
Yeah, it's very interesting, again, to just look at all of this. I will say, look, on a broader level, this is not partisan. Compared to a year ago, is your family faring financially? 43% either say worse off or about the same, and only 15% are better off. I'd like to meet those people. And then in terms of feeling about things, how they are in the U.S. over the next year, I am scared, 47% say hopeful, which is kind of amazing, but the vast majority are either scared or angry. So, I mean, look, overall, Biden's approval rating in this poll comes out to 44%. That said, the fact that he was was able to pull off the midterm victory that they did at approximately 40%, maybe even 39%, by some respects is not a terrible place to be.
I'll never forget Ron Klain tweeting out Emmanuel Macron,
yes,
president of France, his approval ratings before he was reelected.
Right.
And they were like in the 30s. And he was like, oh, interesting. He got reelected with an approval rating that was like super low.
Yeah, but he's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that clearly is their strategy. Like they think they can win. And, they were basically right in the midterms, even though they lost the House and it wasn't the grand celebration maybe that, they portrayed it as. But they bucked historical trends in the midterms, and I think Joe Biden does have a decent chance to get reelected as it stands right now, even if his approval rating remains in like the low 40s.
Mm-hmm. And let's go to the next one, because this is very interesting data as well. In terms of the priorities of those who voted Republican, we shouldn't forget, in terms of the popular vote, the Republicans did broadly win the popular vote. Mm-hmm. If you look at it on a national scale, lowering inflation was at 89%, securing the border at 85%. That actually explains why Biden is paying so much attention to the border right now. Third was increasing U.S. energy production. And then fourth was actually reducing crime. What was even more interesting is actually if you look at the split in MAGA Republicans, because it does show you just how different the split is between people who self-identify as MAGA Republicans and what they actually view as being loyal to Trump and their priorities over people who just vote GOP at the top of the ticket. Let's go to the next one that is there. They say Republicans being loyal to Trump is, quote, very important for 35%. 30% is somewhat important, 21% not too important, 14% not important at all. So the vast majority rating some importance. What's even more interesting is that if you look even deeper within those MAGA Republicans and their priorities, Krystal, they say that investigating the Hunter Biden laptop is actually more important than inflation. So this actually shows you part of why the GOP Congress is acting in the way that they are, because Remember, the only threat that a sitting member of Congress really has is primary. Within those primaries, only the crazy people vote, really, on both sides. It's very rare for normal people to engage in a primary election, or even, frankly, like a midterm election. It's very, very rare, and statistically. So what do they care about? They have to appease our most ardent base, not on policy. The thing that they care literally the most about is investigating Joe Biden. So you have that there, but then you also have a broad swath of the public who's like, hey, you know, the economy really sucks right now. Like, it would just be nice if I could pay less at the grocery store and even less at the pump. That's what I mostly care about. So it's a major problem, I think, for the Republicans to be in this stuck position where policy is what the vast majority of people care about, but the actual people who mostly control their fate in Congress, that's not really what they care about at all.
Yeah, and you know, if you look at the numbers too, they had some about like, do people want to see you standing by your principles or working with the opposition to get things done? And this is another area where, like, you know, the hardcore Republican base wants to see you basically doing what Matt Gaetz and co. did with the speakership fight, and a large majority of independents and the general public wants to see people like working together on, you know, an infrastructure deal or whatever. And so you see this in the way that Joe Biden is positioning himself to run again, going to Kentucky, with being seen with Mitch McConnell in, by the way, a swing portion of Kentucky. I know people don't think of Kentucky as a swing state, but they actually have a governor's race on the ballot this year.
Yeah. And
it's a Democrat who runs the state right now. And he is one of the most popular governors in the entire country, which is also very interesting. Side note, you guys know I'm obsessed with Kentucky politics. Okay, so that's the Republican side of the ledger in terms of what they want to see out of this Congress. They also asked Democrats what their priorities are for this next Congress. Let's put this up on the screen. Number one priority for Democrats for this Congress is protecting Social Security and Medicare. 78%. Refer back to our previous segment about how, you know, at least some Republicans are being quite upfront about how quote unquote entitlements, which is Social Security and Medicare, are in their sights. And you can see how unpopular this would be, certainly with the Democratic base. But this was also one of the top priorities. So it's actually the second highest priority for all voters overall. For Democrats, the second highest priority is addressing climate change. Third highest is protecting abortion access. And fourth highest is lowering inflation. Zoom out to the general public, and you have number one priority continues to be lower inflation. 76% say that. 71% say protect Social Security and Medicare. So again, this is a challenge for the Republican Party, which has staked out an ideological position, which is directly at odds with what an overwhelming majority of Americans want to see out of this Congress. And then 63% say reduce crime. There was another piece, Saagar, here that I thought was interesting, which is they asked about supporting aid to Ukraine. This is one where there's starting to be a growing partisan split, and especially a big split within the Republican Party, within the general Republican voters and what they define as MAGA Republican voters, where the MAGA voters were basically split on whether they support aid to Ukraine or not. Overall, you've got 64% saying they support aid, 36% opposed. I'd have to go back and look at some previous numbers, but I believe that number of support is trickling down over time and definitely softening ultimately over time.
Oh, no, there's no question. At one point, it was almost 80 or 90%, I think, at the outbreak of the war. So, I mean, it makes sense. We're about a year in now, and so you're, of course, going to see that.
People are starting to ask questions about how this is all going to play out.
Look, I mean, the way the question is asked, to me, is outrageous. Like, do you support aid to Ukraine? Nobody, very few people are like zero aid to Ukraine. We're talking about the type of aid to Ukraine, in conjunction with what? In conjunction with diplomacy. So don't let yourself get gaslit on, you know, aid to Ukraine or not.
Is there an inspector general overseeing how the money's being spent? What are you sending?
There are many nuances to this entire discussion which do not belie I support aid to Ukraine.
Yes. Do you want to send fighter jets? Do you want to spend humanitarian aid? Like, there's a lot of different ways that you could slice this.
So within that context, what can we learn from this? All of this, which is, I think that's why the cutting the Social Security entitlement program being pushed by the Freedom Caucus it's going to be a big problem for Republicans. I mean, we underrate significantly how much Paul Ryan's addition to the Mitt Romney ticket really hurt him in the general election, because it wasn't just about painting Mitt Romney as like out of touch, rich elite. It was also like Paul Ryan wants to cut your Medicare. I mean, do we all remember that famous video that Paul Ryan did with the charts about
the PowerPoints
Medicare?
and whatever?
Yeah, and the PowerPoints. God, I hate myself for even remembering it. But it mattered a lot to the American people. People resoundingly rejected it. So over and over again, we've had a situation where touching the entitlement programs is just looked at as complete anathema, especially whenever you're not willing to discuss cuts elsewhere, or especially whenever you're trying to discuss it in the context of removing benefits away instead of trying to make it, quote, more sustainable. And what they really mean by that is like pushing retirement ages up or cutting benefits over the years, or even worse, which is privatizing it.
Yeah.
Something Mr. By the way, Blake Masters suffered at the polls. We also underrate that. So you can see very clearly, in part of the reasons why people voted Democrat, if you're going to have Medicare and Social Security spending up there, this also shows you how difficult and how bad the Rick Scott plan that was released to cut Social Security was, because Biden just beat them over the head with it. Personally, I didn't think it was going to break through, but clearly, at least some of it did.
It did.
I always forget. There's a lot of old people in this country, a ton, and they vote. And it's like the media and the politics and all that you and I consume, the vast majority of our audience cares about as well, is just totally out of step. So for them, I mean, they probably, view their AARP blasts and mailers, all this other stuff. But and I can't fault them. They're the ones who actually benefit from it.
When you look at 71% saying that protecting Social Security and Medicare is priority for this Congress, like it's clearly beyond just the boomers and the silent gen that is concerned about this. These programs are really popular. People are proud of these programs. They really believe in them. And obviously the Republican Party has long, ever since the programs were passed, basically, they've been trying to do whatever they can to dismantle them. George W. Bush ran up against a brick wall in this and his efforts to privatize Social Security. So they've continuing to try to tweak and find ways that they can message this in, some way that's going to be more palatable to the American people. But people really, really see through it. And it is, it is just insanely, insanely unpopular. One more piece of data from here, and then I actually had a question for you, Saagar, on the Paul Ryan piece. So they asked Republicans how they felt about how the speaker fight was handled, and it was split pretty much 50-50. 51% went one way, 49% went the other way. I can't remember which way it was divided, but basically 50-50. Some people, half said this was great, half said this was terrible. So divided in terms of how people felt about that. But the question I was going to ask you is, you mentioned Paul Ryan, and a lot of the priorities that are reflected in the concessions that the Freedom Caucus was able to extract from Kevin McCarthy are very Paul Ryan type priorities. And yet I know that they really hate Paul Ryan now, and I don't really understand it.
Well, I mean, the whole knock on Paul Ryan is that he wasn't a fighter. And I will say, part of the reason he got the speakership in the first place, because he did agree with them substantively on some of the spending cuts. So it's not like that's why they didn't against him. They more view him as like a traitor to Trump because he kind of criticizes the movement. A lot of it is more metacultural in terms of the
It's more about the
affect.
Aesthetics.
It's a lot more about
the ideology.
Well, remember also Paul Ryan did hate them and basically actively spoke out against them after he left office. Part of the reason why they also hated him as well. They never saw him as a genuine ideology. A lot of it comes down to whether you're willing to, quote, fight or not. That's all that really matters. And that's why, I mean, look, if you're looking at that number, 50% is a lot of Republicans who support only 20 actually were willing to do. So that shows you they got a lot of support. Everything I've read from Boehner and all of them is that they despised Roger Ailes and Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly because they always had Jim Jordan and Michelle Bachmann and many of the other Tea Party warriors. They're like, you don't understand what stars you're making out of these people and the amount of leverage that they have now over my caucus. We're basically now 10 years or even more into that phenomenon, and it just shows you that these people, look, you can hate them, love them, whatever. They really have the pulse of the actual base of the party. Or at the very least, the people who have been there, rock red, not only just love Trump, but hate the establishment at a core level. The Jim Jordans and the Gateses of the world, they are heroes for exactly this reason.
And see, it's funny you could even mention Jim Jordan and Matt Gaetz in the same breath because ideologically they're actually quite different.
Total difference.
But I think what you're pointing to is they love the fight.
Yeah.
And the details of what it's over
Don't care.
are less important. So there's a contradiction here where we're talking about how, this priority and that priority and this tactic, that these things are going to be really unpopular. Things like going after Social Security and Medicare. But the fight itself is very popular. People love to see it. People love to see a goober like Kevin McCarthy twisting the wind. I love to see it, right? So I think the fight and the affect and the approach is extremely popular. It's extremely satisfying. And it's only down the road when you see what concessions were shared, what that actually means, and what their ideological priorities are, that the bloom kind of comes off the rose and you end up like Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan and a lot of other Republicans finding out exactly how much appetite the American people have for dismantling Social Security.
Very true.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now. And Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us. And if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.